Hey everyone. My name is Thomas. I am a product manager from Sitecore, and unlike Pramila, I have absolutely nothing to do with Sitecore customers anymore. I work in the product department. I work with building the products, and my responsibility is the developers or the system admins, those kind of guys like you who actually work with the APIs. Before that, I used to work here at Pentia. So I started in Pentia in 2000, and as you know, Sitecore originated from Pentia, so I was part of the original team that developed parts of Sitecore, and hopefully anything of that is left in the product. And then I spent a few years, last 4 years in Australia as part of the team down there and part of the product marketing team. And I built a little demo site as part of the marketing team in Sitecore called Habitat, and created the Helix principles as well. So I've kind of been around the Sitecore organization from all aspects and around the Sitecore product. For the last 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I've spent a lot of time putting together some documentation, lots of PowerPoints around the architecture and configuration of Sitecore 9, because Sitecore 9 is not Sitecore is not what it has been before. It is not as simple as it's been before. It is getting really complex now. There's a lot of things that it does. It has more and more features built into it. And like I said, it's the most tested version that we've ever built. It's also the most configurable version that is ever built. The architecture that is in place now is really forward-facing. It can scale in a lot of different dimensions, and a lot of different roles can scale independently. So the architecture is done right, so to speak. But it adds a whole lot of complexity, as you know. How many of you have tried installing Sitecore 9? How many of you spent just 5 minutes and boom, it was running? Okay, because that's no one, right? It's really, I mean, since everybody in this room probably is really used to sim and things like that, then suddenly you take that away from people and it's just really complex. So that's part of the talk that I have today. How many of you were at the virtual developer day event? How many of you followed the sessions there? Not many. So not many of you have seen my talk on the Sitecore install framework, because the Sitecore install framework is part of the story, the reasoning behind that, and the reason that, oh my God, we have this complex framework to install something. It's not because we want to make things complex. It's because there's a lot more to installing Sitecore now. So what we're going to talk about is before you start jumping on installing a Sitecore installation and running a Sitecore installation, it has a lot to do with planning. What are you going to install? How are you going to install it? How are you going to scale it? How are you going to configure it? Those kind of things. And then we're going to talk a little about the installation options, and the rest of it, we'll see how we get along with that. So planning the installation. What is more important than ever, because of the complexity of the Sitecore platform now, is that you really have to understand the business case. You have to understand why and which parts of Sitecore is important for the customer that you're installing, because Sitecore is not Sitecore anymore. If you have a customer that has a lot of visitors, sure, you have to scale the content delivery environment. If you have a customer that runs a lot of marketing automation, then it's a separate set of roles that you have to scale out. So it's not just scaling the CDCM servers, it's scaling the marketing automation engine. If you have a commerce, you just saw the commerce roles, so there's 4 commerce engine roles. If you have a lot of order processing, if you have a lot of orders coming in, if you have a lot of customers, if you have a lot of authors, and if you have a big catalog, it's different aspects of the commerce engine you have to scale. So you have to know the architectural roles, you have to know the data flows, and then you have to understand what's possible. How can we scale in and out of the different roles to make it as flexible and as capable as you want to, but also, of course, to reduce the cost. We can't afford to put everything on separate servers because there's, as you will see in a second, a lot of roles. So today, Sitecore has three main products. Sitecore Experience Manager, which is the CMS, and the Sitecore Experience Platform, which is the CMS plus the XDB. And then we have Sitecore Experience Commerce, which is what Pramila just showed you, the Commerce Engine. And Commerce Engine doesn't really make sense unless you have a website to show it on. So it's kind of like a step here. You cannot install the Experience Platform, or you can technically, but it doesn't make much sense to install the Experience Database without a CMS, and so on. And if we just dive into what are the different options, as you can see, it's not just a CMS anymore. We do a lot of things, a lot of different aspects of experience management. So there's a lot of different things to focus on, a lot of different business processes that the platform runs and that we can scale. So we're, as Pramila was talking about, she was talking about the roles that the Commerce Engine or the Commerce product has. We have 4 different types of roles that we talk about. So we have the storage roles, the databases, for example. We have application roles, which is the websites and the web services and the Windows services and all those kind of things that run business logic. And then we have indexes, search indexes, and then we have a bunch of cloud services. So those are, of course, not really configurable. It's just something you call and you get a response back. So if we look at the roles available, and I'm sorry for the guys on the video, you cannot read this in any sense. These are the roles that is in all the products now. So we're far away from the previous, no, I can't. We're far away from the CDCM kind of roles. Those two, that's those two up there, right? So now we have over 50 different independent architectural roles that you have to consider when you're installing Sitecore. Do I have to, how does marketing automation reporting, what's that role? What does it do? Do I need to scale it? Do I need to have a separate server for that? What about the XConnect collection search role, or the reference data role, or the suggested test index? So all those kind of roles you have to have some sort of knowledge around to truly set up a performant platform for Sitecore. Of course, we're going to give you some out-of-the-box options that might work for many, but if you really want to know the details of scaling and all that, then you should acquaint yourself with all the roles. So if we just look at the Sitecore Experience Manager, these are the roles that's in there. It's the CDCM servers, it's the content publishing role, .NET Core publishing role. We have the Data Exchange Framework remote client, so that's part of the Data Exchange Framework. And then we have a bunch of databases, the good old master database and web database, the core database. We have a new forms database for the forms module, and then we have session storage. And then we have a bunch of indexes and some some cloud services. So these are the roles in the CMS only. So you can install all of these roles on a single machine, and you can do that with the whole product, by the way, with all 3, you know, the XM, XP, and XC, the commerce. And you can even run Lucene on this one. You cannot do that with an XP, but that's separate. So we're still, from an XM perspective, it's really easy. You can run everything in one website, have Lucene running inside, and just the database. But then you can scale it out to, you know, a Solar service, a Microsoft SQL server. And this is one of the topologies that we ship for cloud, for example. We ship a topology called XM Single as an ARM template, and when you run this, it'll install this this setup. It'll install one web app, and it set 4 databases up and 4 indexes on Azure Search, or sorry, 3 indexes. Then, of course, you can scale it out. You can have split the two roles, the 2 application roles out on separate web apps. And that's another topology that we ship called XM Scaled. And then we can go from there. We can load balance the CD environment. We can load balance the CM environment, or I should say you can. You can set up a separate content publishing role. We can start putting in, for an on-premise setup, we can set up firewalls and secure the databases. and we can have geoscaling in different data centers, and then of course specific roles scale out to different locations, other roles don't. So let's say, for example, the content management environment, you cannot scale that out across different delivery environments or across different regions, sorry, that has to be in one region. So the master database is only a single instance, you cannot have more than one master database, those kind of things. So again, knowledge about the roles, what's possible, what's not possible. And this is just XM, right? So this is just for XM. If we look at XP, there's suddenly a bunch of more roles that you have to concern yourself with. And Experience Commerce brings those additional engine roles and all that. Any questions or comments on that? Are you scared yet?
Clear button. Okay, I was just, you just said you can't scale the master database?
No.
In the old days, couldn't you have like 2 master databases and then have event queues?
Probably.
Okay.
But you can't do that now.
Okay,
not
so that's closed now.
No.
And does Sitecore have a release policy that you can update certain bits and what is matching with what? For example, if you have a problem, if you want to go to the latest version of the publishing service, can you just update that bit, or do you have to update everything? Do you understand?
So,
when you have
yeah.
these roles, can you have independent upgrade paths for each role?
Yep. So there's there is a release, what we call release streams, or release trains, I should say, in the product department. So certain roles and certain products are created in a release train, and that means they have the same release dates. So, for example, Experience Manager, Experience Platform, EXM is now part of one release train. It always gets released together as one version. Commerce has another release train. The publishing service at this point also has a separate release cycle, but there's always a dependent back. So for example, there would never be a situation where just the XDB reporting role is released, and then you have to upgrade that. So roles are part of a product, and a product has a release cycle. So yes, the publishing service is a good example. That might get upgraded. So the publishing service role might get upgraded without the platform being upgraded. Of course, the other aspect is not just scaling out, but it's also combining, because we want to also reduce the resource ask here. We want to make sure that you can actually run this without having to buy a bunch of Azure resources or servers. So some of these roles combine, like the CDCM server. We know that the content management, content delivery, reporting, and processing servers, those are called core roles. And core roles, that's because of historical legacy reasons. Those are the core CMS application code base. So that's the traditional Sitecore code base for those 4 roles. There's actually a 5th role in Sitecore 9.01 called the EXM dispatch. So that's also the same role. And those can be combined into one website. So you don't have to run them as separate websites or application pools. So core roles can be combined. So you can have a CDCM server. And you can split them up for scalability reasons. So that's important to realize when you're looking at that architecture, is that even though we have 30 odd application roles, a lot of them can be combined into single application pools. However, it depends on the code base. So for example, the identity server in Commerce and the BizFX has 2 different code bases. So that has to be 2 different application pools or 2 different web apps in Azure. So if we look at an XP scaled, so that's an Experience Platform scaled solution, this is the default topology that we ship with. If you install an XP scaled, either on-premise or in Azure, this is an Azure example, by the way, then this is what gets installed. So in Azure, using the standard ARM templates, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Azure App Services with this many web apps. So each of the gray boxes represents, or the These gray boxes represent an app service, so those are the resources that you pay for, the CPU, so to speak. And the icons represents either a web job or a web app. But this is just a topology that we've defined as a standard kind of thing. It's not that you have to install this. You can go in and you can reconfigure the ARM template and the WDP installations to fit your needs. So you can combine, let's say, the content management and XDB reporting on one app service if you want to. So instead of paying for 2 app services, just combine those 2 web apps on one app service. If you wanted to, you could also combine those 2 into one running web app. So that's just a configuration change in the Sitecore config file. And then that role would assume both those responsibilities, or that web app would run both responsibilities. Does this make sense? And you can, of course, scale out, and then you can have multiple of a single role. And that's another configuration change somewhere. You can split up the, or you can combine the XConnect roles. So the XConnect roles over here is the same code base. All these icons in this column over here runs the same code base and can be combined. Oh, except the web jobs, of course. But so in Azure, they will run as web jobs, and in on-premise, they run as Windows services. So there's basically like the Commerce minion role. They're asynchronous. They're sort of listening for changes in databases and processing data. As you can imagine, the search indexer, something happens in the XDB database, it'll update the XDB index. The marketing automation engine, if something happens over in the marketing automation database, it runs the marketing and automation flow. So if you have a lot of marketing automation flows, you can have multiple engines running. As I said, you can scale it out. If there's a lot of requirement for processing server on the marketing automation engine, you split that out into a separate Azure app service, and you can dedicate resources to that. So combining which roles combine and which roles doesn't combine is quite important. So if we look at which across the products here, we have XM, XP, XM, XP, Commerce, and Connectors. I'm not sure if you can read this, but these are the different roles that combine. So in this column over here, the Commerce engine roles can combine, the XP service roles can combine, and the core roles can combine. So depending on the code base up there. So which roles can then be scaled out? So one thing is vertically scaling. So which role can you combine or collapse or split out? Another thing is horizontally. Which of the roles can you have multiple instances of? And there are pretty much all of them can have multiple instances. There's a few of them that doesn't support horizontal scaling. Things like the XConnect search indexer, you can only have one indexer. You can only have one BizFX role. Doesn't make sense to have more anyway. Identity servers are the same. So all the others, you can have multiple instances. The reason that there's a parentheses failover for publishing service up there is because it doesn't support parallel publishing. So if you scale out your publishing service, a publishing job will only still run on one instance. So the reason for scaling that out is for failover. If one goes down, the other will take over. So. And that's because of the publishing architecture. It's not because of the architecture of the role. So, as I said, it's really important for you as Sitecore architects, planners, to know the business case and know the roles, know the data flows, which roles communicate for which process, and how to combine, how to scale the roles. And that's where, of course, we have to look inside the Sitecore and maybe say, yes, we haven't been very good at documenting this. So we're doing a lot of catching up now, really trying to push and make sure that we have documentation for this. I'm going to share some stuff coming out very, very soon with you, just at the end if I have time. I don't have any.
25 minutes.
Okay, lots of time. So, as I said, how many of you have installed Sitecore? 9? Okay. How many of you have done it on Azure? Okay. So you've all done on-prem Sitecore install framework. You should have done it on Azure. It's a lot simpler on Azure, really. So, but I'll just go through installing Sitecore. So I'll just call my install script here. So this is a PowerShell script that we created for. Sorry. This is not a PowerShell script we created. So this is a PowerShell script that I created, or the SIF team actually. I shouldn't take any responsibility for this. Or this is basically doing all the steps of installing the XM roles. So this is an XM scaled. So as I say, the CDCM on separate websites. This is what that does. We can just come back to that later. So what are the options for installing Sitecore or configuring Sitecore? So we have on-premise and we have cloud. And to be honest, cloud is becoming de facto from Sitecore side now. This is the #1 thing that we're going to put our money into. This is still going to be supported, still going to run, still going to all that, but this is the main investment area for Sitecore. So that said, there is of course the development scenario. Like, sure, you're going to run your setup on cloud, but how are you going to develop and how are you going to possibly test and things like that in a scaled environment? So for a lot of that, we have the install framework. So the Sitecore installation framework is a PowerShell module that allows you to run and install. So it's an orchestration tool, really. It just runs a bunch of tasks. It's really simple. It doesn't install Sitecore at all. It just runs a bunch of tasks. The reason it's called Sitecore installation framework was because it would be really confusing and we called it something else. But it just runs a bunch of tasks in sequence. So the interesting thing is the pre-configurations of the Sitecore installation framework. So with XM and XP and Commerce, we pre-configured SIF to run a couple tasks that will set up a XM single or an XM scaled or an XP single or an XP single or an XP scaled or a Commerce. So, and these are JSON files that tells the Sitecore installation framework which tasks to run and in which sequence. So for example, for an XM scaled that I'm showing you before, we'll call the IIS, tell that to set up a website or an app pool and website. We'll call the IIS to set up an app pool and a website for CD, for CM. We call Solar for installing all the cores. We call a WDP, which is a web deploy package, to say install this on the CD website and install this on the CM website. So that's the orchestration of XM scale. For Commerce, it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot of different tasks to run, but it still is way, way simpler than what it used to be previously with Sitecore A2. The cool thing about this is that it's all just PowerShell. It's all just JSON files. So you can open it up, you can look at it, you can orchestrate it in your DevOps scenario if you want to. So the purpose of the installation framework is not just to install Sitecore. It is to have the same experience when you're setting up a local developer machine to when you're setting up a production environment. On-prem, of course, because as an alternative in the cloud, we have ARM templates and WDP packages for that. But it's the same technologies. It's PowerShell, it is WDP packages, and they're very similar. Same configurations, XM single scaled, and all that stuff. Then we still have the manual zip files. And we still have the Azure Marketplace, or we do have the Azure Marketplace. So Azure Marketplace is just a click-through guide of setting up those. So for installing Sitecore 9 on-premise, you need a WDP package, which is a web deploy package. You need a CIF configuration, which has, as you can see, the WDP has the assemblies, the code inside. It has some databases, might have databases inside, and it has the config files for the application, of course. The CIF configuration, on the other hand, has the configuration of the system, so the IAS or creating certificates, all those kind of things. Are we running HTTPS or HTTP, those kind of things. And then you have the install framework to actually run to orchestrate those tasks. Then you have your PowerShell on top of that. And then you have the server or VM that you want to install on, and that chain becomes a running Sitecore installation. Comments? Everybody completely understands them. Yeah.
Yeah, just a question. This is just for setting up and installing, right? It's not for continuous deployment, right?
It could be continuous deployment. Okay. I would say if you have, especially on-prem, if you have continuous deployment, this would be a very viable setup for, of course, you then at this point over here somewhere put your custom solution in. So once you have your Sitecore running, then I would take my build assemblies, those kind of things, and chuck in as well.
But on Azure, it would be more provisioning than setting up, right? It makes new servers and okay. Yeah.
So on cloud here, we have WDPs, which is exactly the same. We have one ARM template. We don't have multiple. So up here we have one CIF configuration per role. So we have one CIF configuration for a CD server, one for CM server, those kind of things. In an ARM template, we have everything in one. So the topologies that we ship with has, you know, the system configuration, the security configuration, the infrastructure, which Azure App Services to sit provision and those kind of things. Then you have the Azure Toolkit, PowerShell, and an Azure subscription, and that's a running setup. So.
One quick question. Can you share the presentation?
Can I share the presentation?
Afterwards, can they download the PowerPoint? No?
I can, yeah, I'll share a PDF of it.
Okay.
So this is how fun it is to install. This is terrible. So let me. Yeah. Now we see the same. Yeah. So if we look at the stuff that I just installed, this one, which I hope is done without any errors. It's not showing anything. That's what you get from switching screens. Here you go. Yep. So there you go. So now we have a running Sitecore installation, and as you can see, it's called SEGDK. If I go into my IIS here, should have crossed my fingers. I have a CD and CM server. I have Solar installed. I have the databases installed and all those kind of things. And as you can see, a long kind of log of what's happened. It's also created a file log, so it's run three processes. Oh, this is hard to see, but the log files, this CD server here is called, really? Notepad? So this is the CD log. As you can see, it's done a bunch of tasks here. And you can see all the steps that my script has run through. So this is CIF. This is the on-premise CIF installation. So let me show you the install PowerShell thing that I ran. So in here, in this PowerShell script, I have a bunch of parameters. I have some additional parameters for Solar, and then I have 3 calls to SIF. So the Sitecore installation framework has one important PowerShell function called install Sitecore configuration. And that takes a SIF JSON file, so a Sitecore or a Sitecore install framework configuration. And if we look at one of those, let's say the CD one, so this one, for example, this shows the install framework and what goes on. So first, there's a bunch of parameters. Those are the input to my installation. So what's the package that I want to install? I have to have a license file. I have to have a prefix for the databases and all that stuff. So a bunch of parameters. Then I have some variables, which is not important right now. And then I have the tasks. So first I create the path on disk. Then I create the app pool. Then I create the website, stop the website, stop the app pool, create the bindings, blah, blah, blah. All those kind of in sequence. So this is setting up a CD server. So I have 3 for setting up XM single. I have a CD server, CM server, and the Solar stuff. If we go and have a look at the on-premise, let me get it over here. If we look at the on-premise packages that we share. So we have 2. We have let's go and have a look at the XP one. So if you go on to dev.sitecore.net and download the XP scaled or XP1 package, this is the content of that. So here's the different packages that we have: CD, CM, dedicated dispatch, so that's the EXM dispatch server, processing server, XP, so XConnect collection, XConnect collection search, marketing automation reporting, and then we have the configuration files for setting up all those things. So for setting up an XP scaled, you have to run those JSON files in sequence. So that's basically just running one at a time. Set up the CD server, set up the CM server, set up the reporting server, and you can run remote PowerShell. So if you have multiple VMs, you can run it from your local development machine and do remote PowerShell to say to a server, install yourself as a reporting, all that stuff. So you can run this on the remote server. So as you can see, you can orchestrate this in a continuous integration environment. So tear down the VMs or spin them up and then, deploy onto the server.
I got a question.
Yep.
Wait. But throw it. No, you don't wait. He waits until you've given it.
All right. Have you pre-configured, like today you install Sitecore and then you have to change a bunch of configuration files for each environment. Have you done that in the SIF framework so it configures the roles correctly and disable and enable configuration files?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. So if you have a CM here, this WDP package here, that is a core role, so a Sitecore installation configured just to be a CM. So it has all the right things disabled and enabled. You don't have to worry about that.
So it was also set up cluster names and stuff like that.
Yes. Oh, well, cluster names is a bit tricky because that's multiple, right?
Yes.
So that's where you need to change the default SIF configuration to add those things. Once you've set up 2 CD servers, then you should set up the cluster name in that.
Okay.
And so that's why the SIF configurations are just samples. Those are your starting point for your installation. And then you create your own specific orchestration tasks. And you can even plug in your own PowerShell scripts to run specific stuff that you want to do.
Cool.
Another very important piece to all this is that it's secure by default, which is a pain because it adds complexity to the installation as well. Because what we've decided from Sitecore's perspective is that we need to make sure that these things run securely. We need to make sure that the communication between the CD server and XConnect is secure, that you don't share contact or personal data on HTTP. So what we do, even in a developer setup, is allow SIF to create a local developer or a self-signed certificate. And all that stuff is so annoyingly complex. So it just adds a bunch of complexity to the CIF configuration to set up those certificates and make sure that, you know, all that stuff. If you've ever worked with certificates, you know how tricky it is. And yeah, don't get me started. It's if we look at cloud, we have the same concepts. So we have XM scaled and XP scaled, but in this case, we have ARM templates. So if you go to the dev.sitecore.net site and download XP scaled, XM scaled, you only get the WDP packages. You do not get the ARM templates. For that, you have to go on GitHub and find so Sitecore somewhere here. And then you have to go find the Sitecore Azure Quick Start templates for the version of Sitecore that you're installing. And then you can choose whatever topology you need and then run that. So as I said, this includes infrastructure and all that stuff as well. So what's the time?
8, 7 minutes.
Okay. That's so what's the, oh, damn it. So what's the next steps if you want to have a lot of fun? Still, you have to understand the business case and know the roles and all that stuff. And you also have to know the technology, like the hosting options and how you install on all that and understand the tool set. So you have to not only understand Sitecore and all the roles, you also have to understand CIF. You also have to understand Azure if you want to do that, or like all that stuff, or self-signed certificates if you want to. Yeah. So there's a whole lot of things that you can go and investigate already. So you can go and check out for on-premise CIF, all the WDPs and CIF configurations. There's a community guy. I wish we had the resources in Sitecore to build a GUI for CIF, but Rob has done it. So he's created it's a horrible name, Syphilis. So you can go and download that, and that basically just, you know, gives you a nice GUI to fill in all the parameters that I showed you. All the, so where's their Solar service and what's your prefix and where's the packages and all those kind of things. So it gives you a sim-like experience for setting up Sitecore 9. There's also a bunch of CIF extensions already. So if you can go and have a play with those are for like setting up Solar. So if you don't want to install Solar manually, you can have CIF install it for you, or configure SQL Server, all those kind of things. And then there's all the cloud stuff. If you want to know about cloud and really understand it, you should talk to Rasmus. He's responsible for creating it. So I'm not going to even pretend to know what it is. There's 2 sessions. So Virtual Developer Day is available now. You can go and register and see the sessions still. So it's 45-minute sessions that are recorded around the Azure Toolkit and the installation framework. So if you want to know how those 2 things work, then go and have a look at those. They're good sessions, especially in the bottom one, because I did that. Then what is coming very soon is a lot of documentation and architectural guidance for you. So on truly understanding the architecture of Sitecore 9 and all the data flows involved. So as I said, I spent a lot of time over the last months doing this. So let me give you a sneak peek. So we have 23 videos showing you pretty much all of these different processes and how they work with the Sitecore platform. So I don't see anything. There you go. So here's our now, this is an internal feed, but this is going on YouTube. So we're going to put these videos out for you to understand, for example, how publishing works. And it's very similar to the data flow that Pramila showed you for the commerce. So it shows you how, the content author goes to the content management server and triggers a publishing flow, and that talks to this, which talks to this, which talks to this. So it's a conceptual view of all the roles and how they interact. So watching those 23 videos should give you a really good overview of Sitecore. Then we have also created documentation for all that. So lots and lots of, not that, come on. Nope. That is because I'm on the wrong one. Just give me a sec. So just close this. So what we've done is we've gone and documented all the roles. So all those icons that you saw before, we now have documentation on those. And we can show you for a content delivery role, what is the supported infrastructure, what are the references, what does it reference, on which ports, what search indexes that is, which cloud services, how does it scale, what's the combinations, any privacy concerns, those kind of things for every single role, whether it's an application role, a web, a database, index, whatever, anything. And we also have, let me find the processes and data flows. So if you're not a video person, you can go and read that instead. So you can read about how publishing works from a conceptual point of view. This is all 901 and forward. It's not online now, no. Soon. As you can see, there's just a few more things to put in. So, but I can tell you the part of the business reason, another business reason I would say, except from also explaining all this stuff, is that this feeds into GDPR. So if you're aware of all the GDPR things that's going on, then we need to document data catalogs where we're storing, you need to be able to talk to your customers about where does the customer store their data. And of course, that's what we're documenting here, is where do we store personal data? Where does personal data flow through the system? So that there's a complete transparency in when a customer is tracked on the website, which roles does it go through? So this feeds in, so it needs to be out by what, May 1st, something like that. 18th, okay. And I think we should just have a talk. If there's any questions, any. Oh, do we need the ball? Yeah.
Great. Anyway, right. Question is about the flow and specifically about Solar, because we know we can use something like Solar Cloud, but the thing is we know that there is a limitation for the indexing. How's that called? The service that processes the data and actually indexing, adds the data into the index. But can we scale querying the index? So I mean, if we have multiple data centers, can we have Solar available in multiple parts of the world, so we don't need to query something from US in Australia and so on? Because the thing is, many functionality which we nowadays develops, it depends on the index, and at the moment with version 8 and so on, we have Solar very close, and if we have Solar away, so that will probably introduce very big latency, and the way how we build sites at the moment will no longer work.
So I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. But it's It's coming. It's very, very close. Solar cloud support is very close.
Okay, but the thing is,
So
like,
that would have a distributed solar, that would give you that distributed indexing.
well,
Or indexing would be local, but then you'd have
yeah,
distribution across.
I used to implement solar cloud before
Uh-huh.
without kind of official support from Sitecore.
Yeah,
So can we still do the same thing, or?
but now it will be officially supported, so you don't have to do it yourself. Yes.
Cool.
Any other questions? Anything you'd like to see? Do you want to see how stuff works? Then I can go through the. So there's and by the way, this is covering both XM, XP, and Commerce. So all the products. So if for example you have Commerce here. These are the roles, and these are the processes that we will show you. Talk about the different roles and how they work and how they scale, how policies and environments works, bootstrapping, all the stuff that Pramila is getting out on the documentation site, and how browsing works and all that stuff. So there's the last 3 months of my life.
Yep.
No questions?
Done? Or any questions? Or is it beer time? Questions afterwards. Questions?
Good.
Where the beer is?
So I haven't installed Sitecore 9 yet, and I haven't really gotten into all these roles. So I'm struggling a little to understand how the roles will play for me. So let's say I take 10 roles and scale them out to most of them run in a web app, and then there's one in the job. So let's say I create a website and I need to deploy it. Would I have to like deploy that to each web role, or do you see in the future? I mean, so like for instance, if there's an indexing role, does that have a web root? Like, is that an actual Sitecore instance that I have to deploy my code to?
It's an actual web instance. So
Okay.
it's not a Sitecore, it's not a traditional Sitecore. We don't have one code base now anymore. We used to have just the one code base that did everything. Now we have separate code bases for XConnect, separate for the commerce engine, separate for CDCM. So if you want to create a commerce plugin, for example, then you need to install stuff on the commerce engine application. You mentioned continuous integration before. If you set up a continuous integration flow for this, you would end up with setting up, maybe if you combine all the roles, you'd probably set up 5 to 7 different websites. And if you customize all of them, you'd have to put code on all 7 of them. But that's unlikely. Like, for example, the XConnect search indexer, you probably never customize that. Whereas the commerce engine, of course you'd customize that. The CDCM server, of course you'd customize that. The BizFX role, never. Probably never. Should never say never, but yeah. So yes, there's
so for instance, the search indexer. Mm-hmm. So I have a website with a CSS HTML and a DLL. I would never deploy that to the search indexing role. Is that correctly understood?
You have a what, sorry?
There's a search index
Yeah,
role.
yeah.
I would not deploy DLL for my website to that role. That'll just
not unless you want to extend the indexing capabilities. Okay. I'm not even sure that it's possible to extend the XConnect search indexer.
So it's only a subset of the system. The Sitecore kernel, that DLL isn't even on that, maybe.
No. The kernel is just on the core roles.
Okay.
The kernel is the code base for the old core roles. So you would imagine a time in the future where the processing role, for example, no longer has the kernel DLL on it. It has a separate code base for processing XDB data. So XConnect, the XConnect roles, XConnect collection search, XConnect collection, reference data, marketing automation, reporting, marketing automation, operations. Those 5 roles have the same code base and can be combined. But they do 5 different things. but it's just the same code base that runs it. So.
So how many of the roles is run in an IIS process? Because I assume the database is run in a database server, so you don't deploy any code to it.
Yep.
And I assume the indexes are in a search server, such as Solr or something.
I know it's small here, but thanks to the UX team in Sitecore, all of these are IIS or web roles. These are worker roles, so the little cogs. So those will run in a web job or in a Windows service or something like that. They might run in a web process, but they're not accessed. They don't have an endpoint that you would call. Okay. So the point is that they're asynchronous in some sense. So for example, the minions role here is actually a web role, but it never takes any requests. Okay. Because it just sits there, listens for changes in the shared environment, and then runs order processing or things like that.
But the search roles are not code, is that correct? On the right?
Oh, those are indexes.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. So that's indexes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So those are indexes in Solr, Azure Search, Lucene, something else that we can run. Over here, for example, we have databases or storage roles, I should say. We have session state. Session state is a storage role. You can install session state as in process. We still call it a session or a session state or a storage role. You can also put it out to Redis. You can also put it out to SQL, something like that. So that's why each role, as you saw in the documentation, has a supported infrastructure clause, because some of them might have different infrastructure requirements. Okay. Mickey needs the ball.
So thinking of continuous delivery, does the SIF framework tear it all down and rebuild it if I run it when something is already installed? For instance, let's say we need to upgrade Sitecore 9 to Sitecore 9.1. Will it remove everything first and then reinstall it?
As I said, when I mentioned the installation framework doesn't do anything.
It doesn't do anything.
It is just an orchestration tool, just like you say, Team City doesn't do anything. Team City doesn't do anything at all. You have to tell it what to do. So we have not made uninstall scripts for our topologies, but you can write them yourself.
Yeah.
This is a SIF configuration that tears down what I just installed, because it just does the reverse part of it. It removes the folders, removes the app services, it removes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking along, you have added so many roles now, so upgrading each one of those will be quite a pain.
Yeah. That's why personally, and I don't think we have any recommendations on that, but personally, I think every installation has to be on a clean Sitecore. It's not a question of, you should always think of Sitecore as a running platform and then put your solution on top. And then, as you say, when you upgrade, you tear down your instance and you put your new upgraded solution on top. I know there's the databases and all the items and all that shit, but put your instance on top of a running Sitecore. Don't try to, lift and shift.
Yeah.
People in Aarhus and Sweden going, ah!
So in Azure, it would be provisioning new Azure resources, so you would get new IP addresses, new everything, right? If you run these. So they're definitely not made for that, right?
Rasmus, help me out.
Actually, you don't use IP addresses, you use host names.
Okay.
And those are globally unique.
Okay. But you would still have to write something for continuous integration into Azure. You wouldn't use this for as a starting point for that, right? This
No,
is
no,
for
no.
provisioning new servers.
SIF is not an orchestration tool for the cloud. That's just for on-premise and making sure that you can run things. And there's, I mean, you can write all this yourself using plain PowerShell. What we've just done is we've kind of abstracted parts of that away and created some tasks for starting a web, starting the app pool, stopping the app pool, doing all that stuff. So. Are we out of time?
I think so.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for turning up, everybody, and the people in Sweden and in Aarhus. I don't know, but some of you guys, if you want to do presentations, yeah, you can send an email to me if you want. I guess you all know my email address, or do we have a better way? We have a form coming out soon. Is it out? We have a form somewhere. I'll post where it is soon. All right, be here that way. Oh, bye-bye Sweden and Aarhus.